Alright, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been going through a series of video presentations I'm creating for the Rankin Technical College AWD Application and Web Development 1111.NET Framework with Web Databases class. And I'm going through our textbook for the class, which is ASP.NET MVC with Entity Framework and CSS. I'm into Chapter 7 of 18. And about 200 pages into a 600-page book. And as you can see, and I may have gone over this yesterday, I don't remember if this is where I left off or not. But one of the things that they want us to do here is to change the Navbar from fixed top to static top. And as it says, once you do that, it'll disappear off the screen when you're scrolling, and it'll push the rest of the content down, so that the roles will now be visible. So what we're doing is when we went through this yesterday, the word roles was not shown there. Also, and you might have your own thoughts about this, you know, the smaller you make your screen size, the less stuff you're going to be able to show on the screen at once. I mean, imagine what you see here in this nav bar on a phone. What you're going to get is the hamburger menu like this. And when you open it up, it'll have the different possibilities in it. But when you make those changes, and this is a media query. We talked about media queries in the AWD1111 or Web Development Technologies class. But what this is saying is, if you've got a machine with a minimum width of 1200 pixels, all right, we want to change the max width on it to 1300 pixels. So again, typically on like a desktop, notice how now it all appears on the same line and you see the word roles. All right. Okay. Next it says we cover editing, the editing of a role. In this trivial example, it will mean editing the role name. Not a big thing. First of all, it says modify the get version as follows. Again, I am on page 204 at the bottom of the page, and then going up to the top of the next page. So you can see we added an input parameter here. All right, and actually I guess we changed it from into a string so it can be used in the role manager.findById async method. All right, these are long strings rather than integers. The program then searches for the role, and as it says, if it's null, it wasn't a good request. All right. If the role is found, its data is assigned to a new role view model object and passed to the view. Now, my goal today is to get through the rest of this chapter. All right. I'm not sure exactly how this class is going to play out for the fall 2018 semester. This textbook is a very well written textbook. Mr. Naylor has done a very good job. That said, much of the book, in my humble opinion, is key in this code. You key in the code, and then there's a kind of a short explanation of what the code is doing. I wish there was less code and more explanation. That's not a rip on the gentleman who wrote the book. He knows so much more about this topic than I do. I'm just saying that there are times when there are things that are put in there that I wish had more of an explanation, because I'm probably not the right person to give it that explanation. All right. So middle of page 205, next, add a new edit view and set it up as shown here. So the view name is edit. It's an edit template, and there's the model class. Note, I think you leave the data context class blank. It's not a partial view. It will reference script libraries and use a layout page. And then they say when you go in, start changing it. Well, what are we doing here? Remember what the view bag is again. And I hate to just be a broken record, but you use the view bag when you've got short, bursty little pieces of information. All right? And that's an example right there. All right. So we set the title, show the title. Then we update the post class as is shown right there. And you can see it on the screen right underneath the code. The key method here is the role manager.updateAsync method used to update a role with any new property values assigned to it. All right, well, what does that mean? Well, notice, if we want to come in and edit a role, we can go in and change the name then. All right, no big thing right there. Hopefully that makes sense. Deleting a role, hopefully you find a lot of this information fairly intuitive. All right, so as it says there, to enable editing of roles, first modify the get version as shown right there. It's very similar to the get version from the edit, but it does not populate a new model, which makes sense because you're removing something. All right, and what that results in after you do all this is it comes back and it says, are you sure you want to delete this role? Notice, because it's a very important thing to notice when you look at the message there. It's on the book, in the book on page 209, and you can see it on screen. Deleting the role will remove all users from this role. It will not delete the users. They still exist, but they're no longer defined to be a part of that role. Okay, so as it says, to give this view a method to target, we update post. We add a using statement to use Microsoft.ASP.NET.Identity, and then we update the HTTP post version, renaming it delete confirmed, and then update it as follows so that it finds a role based on the ID and then it deletes the role. One thing to realize, because we've done a little bit of this, so I just wanted to mention it, there are certain conventions that, for lack of better words, it's expected that you're going to follow when you work with MVC applications in ASP.NET. All right? There are certain conventions that it's expected that you're going to follow. All right? And again, do you have to follow these? Well, it makes it much easier for the system when you do follow certain conventions. All right? And taking this from a document that I found online, and it talks here about 3 of these conventions. All right? And those particular conventions are, number 1, each controller's name ends with the word controller, home controller, etc. And each one of those controllers lives in the controller's directory. That's the first thing. Second thing, there is a single views directory, and that single views directory is used for all views in an application. Third, views that controllers use live in a subdirectory, so a directory underneath the views main directory, and they have the same name as the controller without the controller suffix. So in other words, if you have a view called product controller, then the views for that will live in a folder named product that's under the views directory. But as far as naming things, like for example, and you've seen this, edit.cshtml, delete.cshtml, you can rename those to anything you want. So this went from delete.cshtml, I believe, in this example, to delete confirmed. And you can do that without any kind of a problem. All right, the system doesn't care if you do that. All right, so the key method call in here, as you'd probably guess, is to the role manager's delete async that's right there. That takes an identity role object as an input parameter and attempts to delete the role. All right. The next thing that we're asked to do and this is up on page 210, as you can see, add a basic admin controller and a view. At the moment, as the system says right here, the website has no links to the new roles, admin controller, or associated views. So it's just kind of out there in an island, on an island. All right? So it says we're going to create a very simple admin page with links to all the index pages. Think about what an admin is doing. Someone who is an administrator, whatever she or he is an administrator of, when you're talking about basically IT-wise like this, they're the kind of person who either allows somebody to do something, all right? So if they're brand new, they give them something that previously they weren't able to do because they weren't in there, or they take somebody who can do something and they allow them to do something else, be that add something, change something, whatever, or they take somebody who's got the ability to do something and they take that away. What does that sound like? That sounds like the C, U, and D of CRUD. Create, update, and delete. And that is the basic job, typically, of an administrator. All right, so that's what we're talking about in here. All right, so first it says what we want to do is to create an admin controller class by right-clicking on the controllers folder, choosing Add Controller, creating an empty controller that's named Admin Controller. Now remember, when we create something that's empty, it basically is just that. It has virtually nothing in it. When we do that, we've got total control, but there's more code that we have to write. All right, if we don't choose something that's empty, typically some code will be written for us. But sometimes that stock code is going to have to be changed. Sometimes a little bit, sometimes a lot. If we're working with something very simple, maybe very little to not at all. All right, so in this new admin controller, it says right-click the index method, choose Add View, and update the view so that it allows links to the product images, the role admin, and the user admin pages. Next, we replace the Manage Images link in the Views Shared layout. Okay, so we end up with something that looks like this. Again, that's the job of an administrator. And since this application that we're working with, all right, the user isn't going to be the one necessarily, I'm sorry, the admin isn't going to be the one necessarily who's going to work with the products. But look what's there. They're managing images, so they're allowing you to add images, remove images, etc. Same thing with roles. So with a role, you're assuming you've already got the user set up, and then you could take she or he and add a role to them, modify a current role, delete the role they have, etc. And same kind of thing with users. Add users, etc. Adding authorization. It says we have already covered adding authorization to a controller earlier in the chapter. We're going to use this again in the admin controller. However, first we're going to display the admin link only to the users in the admin role. That should make sense. You have to be logged in as an administrator, okay, to get admin capability. So the author says if you click the log out link, the admin link will no longer appear. And if you do log in as an administrator, there's the admin link, and you see there it's gone. So this is saying only allow that link to appear if the person has been authenticated and their role has been authenticated to basically be that they're an administrator. Users can still access the admin index page anonymously by simply entering the /admin URL. So to prevent that from happening, we go in and we add some data annotations. In particular, we add this authorization that you see right here. So now as it says, when a user attempts to actually go in and use the admin page, they'll be prompted to log in. That should all make sense. All right. So in this next section here, starting on page 213, it covers working with users, including how to add new fields to an existing user class, how to work with two database and contexts in one project, how to manage users self-registration. All right, the key word there is self. They can register themselves, but if they do something illegal, whatever, for instance, a user is not going to be able to go in and set up their login name, for example, as admin. It just wouldn't make sense to do that. Just about everything to do with working with roles was based on the role manager class. Working with users is based on the user manager class. All right. It says when we worked earlier with roles, it was necessary to create a new class named Application Role Manager, which inherited from the Role Manager class. This time with users, we do not need to create an Application User Manager class because when the project was created, this class was automatically set up for us. All right. So, extra properties, middle of page 213 to the bottom of the page. If you expand the user's database table, you will see the properties. Well, do I still have the project up from yesterday? It looks as though I do. Now this is how it looks in the database. This isn't what they're showing in the book. But notice there's a lot of stuff in there. And the equivalent for this stuff, code-wise, is shown in the textbook here. I'm not going to bring it up, but it's shown here in the textbook right here. This class is provided by default when using identity and is part of the Microsoft.ASP.NET.Identity.Entity Framework namespace. And the author says we're not going to examine each field here. The reason for listing it is so you can see what properties are currently defined for a user and what is not defined for a user. So if we want to define more stuff that's not in there, as the author says, we can create a new class in the models folder, as an example, named address, and put address information. So address, basically city, state, zip type of an idea. Well, they don't have, they've got address 1, address 2, town, county, but you get the idea. All right, and then they come in and it says we're going to use that address more than once for both users and for orders, so it's defined as a distinct class. We've defined all the fields as required apart from the address line too. To add extra fields to a user, you need to update the application user class. In order to add a first name, last name, date of birth, and address, you do this. And this. After the code, and it's down here, it says ensure that you are using, or you add the using system to the top of the file so that the date time can be found. And also a using system.componentModel.data annotations. That shouldn't have to be explained because we've talked data annotations quite a bit in the past. Next is working with two database contexts, as it says here. In order to enable migrations for the identity database, we first need to update the existing migration file or files in the migrations folder so that we can enable migrations for the application DB context. Update the existing files. Change the name of migrations, configuration.cs to store configuration. Again, it's not that you have to do that. Update the class name and constructor so that, again, rather than configuration, it's now store configuration. Notice, again, on the top of page 216, update the store context connection string property. Then create a new migration. Notice we've got the minus configuration on here, and we're giving it the name. And it says we should then see a new migration file with the code shown on the bottom of 216 and all of 217. Then we run the update database command on 217, and we also add to that the minus configuration store configuration. Now, as it says, delete the old migration files. One thing about me, I would say that at least somewhat, when it comes to writing code like this, for lack of better words, I can be a hoarder. I don't really like to remove old code. In fact, I'd rather take stuff and copy it someplace, even if it's not to the project, so that I've got it, so that if something does not work, I can go back and look at it. To enable migrations, you can see what you're doing right here. All right, to add a new migration, to update the database, etc. So now we've got that new information in there. All right, bottom of 218 going on to 219, updating the admin user creation code for the new user fields. It says now that we've added some extra required fields, we're going to update the code that creates the user. Well, you'd want to do that so that you could add their information. Remember, it says there on the bottom of the page, it's important to not hard code the creation of admin users inside code in a commercial project. This is the way they're showing it here is done, for lack of better words, they're doing this for demonstration purposes. All right. Okay, I'm at 22 minutes, so rather than going on and creating a user's role in database creation, I'm going to stop right here, pick it up there in just a couple.